All right, good morning. Hopefully, again, you're all hearing us. If not, let us know and through the chat. I'm Bryce Wilson, the Finance Officer for the Department of Education. Thank you for joining us this morning. We have Jeff Schreier from the Auditor's Office on to talk about a bunch of new things around LB 644 and others on the auditor's budget document. Also, Kevin Lyons, our state aid director, or school finance director, I guess. Michelle Cartwright and Stephanie DeGroat, our budget AFR experts, also here to present this morning. So the five of us will be walking through a lot of information for you. Please feel free to type questions into the chat as we go along. We'll try to monitor that. At some points, we may answer those questions right away. If not, we'll go back to them at the end. We are recording or attempting to record, I think, this session, and we'll be putting it out on our website. So if you need to or want to go back and listen again for your enjoyment and entertainment, that will be available hopefully within a couple of days on our website under the webinar. It's on the bottom of the school finance website under the alphabetical listing, where the bullets are there in the center of the page. So that's where it'll be available. We'll also be having links to it on our SFOS email that comes out monthly. So that's kind of the plan. As far as just, I guess, other things. So if you are going to be a new superintendent or business manager or something like that, while I just mentioned the SFOS email, just a plug to make sure that you're getting that. If you are a bookkeeper or not a superintendent or business manager, which is the only two people that we have on the listserv right now to send that out to, make sure your superintendent or business managers are sending that to you. If you're not getting it and you're one of those, you need to have that. We pull that out of NSSRS where the staff reporting is done. So you need to list yourself as a business manager or superintendent there to get that email. So with that, I'm just gonna note one thing that's been coming up a bunch before I turn it over to Jeff here, and that we're getting a lot of questions, and be glad to cover this more probably in upcoming presentations, but around inflation and how that's affecting everything. And something jumped out at me in the headlines yesterday I thought was worth mentioning to everybody on that very topic, and that's, I don't know if a lot of you saw, but apparently the rapper, I'm not a real big rapper fan, but the rapper 50 Cent, due to inflation, has now changed his name to 85 Cent. So just wanted to make sure people know that inflation's real and it is affecting all of us in some way or another. So with that terrible joke, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he's going to start you off on what you need to know on their budget document.
All right, good morning, everybody. Like Bryce mentioned, we'll spend probably the majority of my part of the presentation on 644. So just kind of the first thing here I'll mention to everybody is that the due date for the budget to our office, county clerk, Department of Education, that's now September 30th. So with all these new requirements we have, that filing date got pushed back 10 days. So the budget and also the interlocal agreement report that has to come to our office, both of those have a September 30th due date. So 644, I'm sure everybody's favorite topic right now. Just kind of a summary of that is that a county, city, school district, and community colleges, if they increase their property tax requests by more than 2% plus growth, what's referred to as the allowable growth percentage, then they would be required to participate in the joint public hearing and also have their information included on a postcard that is sent out to all the taxpayers that pay the levy for that entity. So that joint public hearing is going to be everybody in the county, everybody meaning the county, city, school district, community college, any of those entities that are over the allowable growth percentage. They all come together at one hearing and talk about the tax request. So these allowable growth percentages, joint public hearing, postcards, if any of you have a tax request, a total tax request that increases by less than the allowable growth percentage, then none of this applies to you. But if you're going to be over the allowable growth percentage, which you're not going to know for sure until August 20th when the county assessor valuations come out. But if you're over that allowable growth percentage, you would attend the joint public hearing, again, with anyone else in the county that's over the allowable growth percentage. But if you are not over the allowable growth percentage, you would not attend the joint public hearing, and instead you would have your own tax request hearing as you've done in the past. So it's not a case of we could have 3 hearings. Everybody has the budget hearing, and then it's an either or. So either you hold your own tax request hearing if you're not over the allowable growth percentage, or if you are over, then you would attend the joint public hearing. Allowable growth percentage. So as I mentioned, before we know the definitive allowable growth percentage, we have to wait until August 20th when we get the certification of value from the county assessor. So there's going to be some new information on there. So it's going to have the real growth value, the prior year real property valuation, and then the real growth percentage. So we're going to take whatever that real growth percentage is, add 2%, and that becomes our allowable growth percentage. So that's how we're going to know what our allowed increase is.
Jeff, I don't know if you're going to cover this. You can stop me if you are, but for those school districts that have, which is most of our school districts that have valuations in multiple counties, my understanding is they're going to have to do this calculation themselves to determine their overall growth percentage to see if they're at what their real growth percentage is going to be in total.
Correct.
So if you have 3 counties, you're going to have to take that the real growth and divide that by the prior year's total taxable value to come up with that real growth percentage overall for your district.
After adding all of them together from all the counties.
Correct.
Yep. All right, here, joint public hearing notice. So if any county, city, school district, or community college is over that allowable growth percentage, they are required to provide their phone number and their proposed tax request to the county clerk by September 5th. I've been recommending that information be provided to all county clerks in which your school district has value. So if you have value in 2 or 3 or more counties, you would want to make sure that you are talking to all of your counties. There's been some talk that the counties are going to try to get together and do something to kind of accumulate this all in one place, but I haven't heard anything or seen anything specific. So as of right now, that's kind of my recommendation, is making sure you're communicating with all your counties. Also want to check in with your county clerks regarding how they want you to provide your proposed tax request and phone number to them. It's kind of going to be up to each county how they want that. So if you're not sure, you haven't heard, you'll want to talk to your county clerk regarding how to get that information to them. Once the county clerk gets your proposed tax request and phone number, they'll forward that on to the county assessor, and then the county assessor is going to use that information to create these postcards that get sent out to all of the taxpayers. County clerk is also responsible for organizing this joint hearing, and they are required to notify you guys of the date, time, and location of the hearing. So kind of final say of when and where this hearing is up to the county clerk. But if you guys have conflicts or anything like that on a particular date, you want to make sure you are letting your county clerk know so they can see what they can do about it. But ultimately, they get to decide when and where this joint hearing is held. County clerk is also responsible for publishing notice in the newspaper for this joint public hearing. So it's not a case of every subdivision has to publish notice. If there's 5 subdivisions that have to attend this joint hearing, the county clerk would do 1 publication. So it's not a case of every one of them has to do their own publication. We have to designate one representative to attend the joint public hearing, so we don't have to send the full school board. We just have to designate one person or one representative to attend the joint public hearing. If the school district is in multiple counties, you're only required to attend the joint public hearing in the county where your principal headquarters are located. There's no requirement that this representative be a board member. It technically doesn't even have to be an employee of the subdivision. So it doesn't have to be the superintendent, doesn't have to be the school board chair, it doesn't have to be the business manager. It could be whoever the school wants to be the representative. But whoever they designate should be knowledgeable about the budget, should be able to answer questions that might come up, and speak intelligently. So it's going to be up to you guys of who that representative is, but there's nothing to say specifically who that has to be. There might be, back one more, Bryce. Might be one more. There might be entities that are required to be included on a postcard in a particular county, but they would not attend that county's joint public hearing. So the example I've been using is Gage County might send out a postcard to their taxpayers, but that postcard might say that if somebody wants to talk to the representative from Southeast Community College, they would need to attend the Lancaster County joint public hearing. So that postcard might have hearing information for multiple counties, depending on where their principal headquarters are located. All right, next slide. Couple more things here on the hearing. We have to hold this joint public hearing. County clerk has to schedule it between September 17th and prior to September 29th. So basically September 17th through September 28th would be the time frame we're working with here. And we also need to hold this joint public hearing before any of the participating subdivisions file their budget with the county clerk and the state auditor's office. So technically speaking, you could hold your a board meeting to actually adopt the budget prior to this joint public hearing, as long as you don't send it in to our office in the county until after you've held or attended this joint public hearing. But we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. Kind of our recommendation, like we mentioned earlier, we still have to have the regular budget hearing as we have in the past. So no changes to the budget hearing part of things. So you might want to think about getting that budget hearing scheduled early on, maybe late August, early September. So you don't have to try to fit the budget hearing in the same time frame we're trying to schedule this joint public hearing, schedule board meetings, that kind of stuff. So you might want to, if you've historically held that budget hearing kind of later on in September, you might want to think about pushing that up. This joint public hearing needs to be held after 6 p.m. So we want to basically make it easier for those taxpayers that work normal business hours to attend. So it has to be held after 6 p.m. local time. The representative of the subdivision needs to give a brief presentation on their intent to increase the property tax request by more than that allowable growth percentage. And they would also need to explain the effect of that increase on their budget. They also need to identify who they're representing. So whoever stands up representing each subdivision, they need to identify who they're associated with. And then they need to identify the dollar amount of their proposed tax request. We have lots of other information that needs to be part of this presentation at the joint public hearing. I won't go through all of it. You can see there's a lot of information there, but it's pretty similar to the language that has to be included on the property tax request resolution every year. And it's also similar to what we've been publishing in the past for the tax request hearing. So a lot of it's the same information, but now we also have to communicate that at this joint public hearing. Anybody that shows up from the public at this joint public hearing needs to be allowed to address the representatives and provided a reasonable amount of time to provide their input. So the statutes don't give a specific time frame. It doesn't say minimum of 5 minutes, minimum of 10 minutes. It doesn't say anything. It just says a reasonable amount of time. So I've been recommending that kind of each county for their hearing, they need to kind of come up with what is reasonable for their hearing. So if there's only 2 people that show up, I think you probably want to give them at least 5 minutes to address the representative. But if there's 50 people that show up, maybe you only give them 2 or 3 minutes. But I think it's going to be up to each county and those representatives to figure out what is reasonable for their hearing. Yeah.
Jeff, a question came in, says, would a presentation over the notice of special hearing to set the final tax request in the APA document fulfill the presentation requirement? So if they basically just covered what the notice of special hearing to set the final tax request says, or what that document shows from the budget document, would that cover what they need to cover?
It should cover most things. I don't want to say for sure. You want to make sure you're looking at what the specific requirements are, but it should cover most
Yeah.
of those requirements.
So what I would say in addition to that is that has a lot of the information there, like Jeff said, but go back to the previous slide and make sure that every piece of that is covered on that. I don't, off the top of my head, I can't answer that either. But the budget text, does that also?
It did not.
It did not show that piece of it. Okay.
I think it might be in the instructions we have out there.
Okay.
I think.
We'll cover that. I'll cover that more at admin days. Make sure that information's there.
Last thing here, it is possible that we're having this joint public hearing, but we might only have one subdivision that has to attend. So depending on how each county, city, school district, and community college, depending on where they're located, where their principal headquarters are, and what their increase is, we could have a joint public hearing with just the school district there. So a question that I've gotten is if there's only one person or one subdivision that has to attend this joint public hearing, do we still need to do it? And the answer to that is yes, you would still do this joint public hearing, but you would potentially be the only one there. Next thing here, cost of these postcards. So we're mailing out a postcard to every parcel that pays the levy for any of these entities that are over the allowable growth percentage. So again, those postcards are kind of the responsibility of the county to create and mail out. But the statutes do say that the cost of creating and mailing the postcards, including staff time, materials, and postage, is to be divided among the participating political subdivisions. I believe it says proportionally based on the number of parcels. So the county is going to pay these costs up front, and then they're going to turn around and bill back your portion of it to each of the subdivisions that were required to attend the joint public hearing and be included on the postcard. So just kind of a summary of the dates and date changes here. So as we mentioned, September 5th, that is a deadline for everybody to get their phone number and proposed tax request to the county clerk. And again, that would be if you're anticipating you're going to be over the allowable growth percentage. September 10th, that is the deadline for the county clerk to kind of accumulate all that information together and forward it on to the county assessor. County assessor will put all that together and mail out the postcards. And then September 17th through the 28th is when the joint public hearings will be held. And again, you should be hearing from your county clerk regarding when and where these hearings are held.
Another question came in. This is a good question as well. If they don't need to be a part of the hearing but want to do it as a way of making sure they have good public disclosure, can they still do it? And do they have to pay for the postcards? I would assume they'd still have to pay for if they want to be a part of it, they're going to have to pay for the postcards, whether they're subject to that law or requirement or not.
Yeah, I would say if you want to be included here and have your information on the postcard and attend the joint public hearing, I would say if you're on the postcard, then you would pay for it. If you want to not be included on the postcard because you think you're going to be under, but you still want to show up to the joint public hearing, I suppose you could. And if you're not included on the postcard, then you probably wouldn't have to pay for the postcard. But if you're wanting to if maybe originally you were thinking you weren't going to be over the allowable growth percentage, but you just want to attend anyways for public disclosure, you have to be careful that if later on, if you think you do end up needing to be over, but you attended the joint hearing but did not have your information on the postcard, I would say that's a no-go. So I don't know if that answers the question.
So what I've been telling districts, I think makes sense is if there's question, so I think this goes along with that question. If there's question in your mind, whether you're gonna be subject to the joint public hearing requirements because your budget's still a little bit in limbo, it hasn't been finalized, it makes sense to send your information to the county on the upper end of that range that you're working through with your board and finalizing, and present that information. It's easier and better to back off your actual budget that's passed and have it be less than what you disclose. If you go the opposite way and your budget you actually end up adopting is more than what was there, you're going to have additional disclosures to take care of and make sure you meet. So I guess kind of along with that question, I would say if there's uncertainty, I think you're better off to be part of that joint public hearing. I think if once we see what happens across the state, I would be shocked if we don't have by far the vast majority of school districts participating in joint public hearings as opposed to not. So I think it's going to be the normal. So
the only other thing I would mention is I think it would probably be a good idea to certainly not wait until last minute. So hopefully by September 5th, you have a pretty darn good version of your budget completed. Maybe it's not 100% finalized, but if maybe you've waited until later on in September to get an idea of what your tax request is, I would say probably want to push that up to make sure you have as good of a budget as possible by September 5th.
All right, I got another question here. I think I can take this one. So for schools that successfully passed a bond, will that affect the allowable growth? The answer to that is yes. If you passed a bond and your tax asking is going to go up, since this tax asking is a total of the 4 taxing funds that you have, if you passed a bond, your tax asking likely is going to go up more than 2% plus allowable growth. So yes, passing a bond means you're very likely going to be part of a joint public hearing. Got a couple of questions coming in. So is the growth essentially an increase in tax at dollar asking? And that would be, the growth is calculated based on your tax asking. So if your tax asking is going up, that's the amount that we're comparing to that allowable growth to see if it's over that threshold or not, to determine if you're going to be part of the joint public hearing. I think that's it. You're back to go on.
All right, here. Last one here. 10 days after this joint public hearing, the county clerk is required to provide any of these subdivisions that participated in this joint public hearing a report, basically kind of outlining who was there from the subdivisions, who was there from the public, and just kind of information on the report. So it's not necessarily a meeting that's going to have meeting minutes or anything like that. It's just a hearing. So basically I guess you could call it minutes, or the documentation of this hearing will be this report that is completed by the county clerk. We're not requiring all of the subdivisions to file that report with our office. We're going to get that directly from the county. So depending on when this joint public hearing is held and the 10-day time frame, it's likely that the schools and others might not have it before the budget's due to our office. So we're just going to get that directly from the county. So we would not need to get that from all of the entities when they file their budget. Let's see here. Next, September 30th. Again, like we mentioned, September 30th is the due date for budgets to be filed with county clerk, state auditor, NDE, and also September 30th is the deadline for the interlocal agreement report, like we mentioned. October 15th, so that is the deadline now for you to get your property tax request resolution to the county clerk. Previously, that was October 13th, so that got pushed back 2 days to October 15th.
Got another question, and I can take this one. So the question is page 6 of the NDE budget document. First, I want to clarify. So when there's errors on the budget document, that's the auditor's office's budget document, not NDE's budget document. Just want to make sure that's clear. We have enough of our own issues. So since that already shows on the page of the calculation that 2% growth, which is the standard part plus the real growth percentage, the question is, do we have to wait until August 20th to have that final determination? The answer would be yes, probably, because that 2% is only part of the threshold calculation. The 2% everybody gets, and then you get to add on the allowable growth percentage, which is what the county is going to certify to you. So that could be, for some counties, for some school districts, that's probably going to be like 0.2%. It ain't going to be much. For some school districts, so that could be a couple percent. I could see 2, 3, maybe more in the really growing areas. So that will set that threshold of determining whether you're required to be part of that joint public hearing. So you can kind of do some initial calculations, and I would recommend doing that. And some of your counties are good about giving you information ahead of time, and so you might be able to know what that's going to look like. Other counties don't give you anything until August 20th, and so for those, you're going to have to see where that threshold is. Now, if you know where your budget's going to hit is 1.5%, and that shows you what 2% is, you already know you're underneath and won't be part of that joint public hearing. So you can do some work with it, but you can't really finalize it if you're going to be over 2% until you know what your allowable growth percentages are from the counties on that. I got another question. Let me read it. You go on. Are you ready for the next slide?
Yep.
Okay.
October 20th is the new date that the county board sets levy. So that's the deadline for the county to set the final levy for all the entities in the county. Previously, that was October 15th. I will say that typically the counties do that probably a little bit earlier just based on when they hold their board meetings. But the deadline for that would now be October 20th. But there is no change to the final date to make corrections to levies. So if the county board sets a levy by October 20th and it's wrong for whatever reason, if it's a math error, a transposition error, whatever the error is, we only have until November 5th to correct that levy. So typically I recommend after the county sets those levies by October 20th that you go out and ask the county for a copy of what they set and review that and make sure that what the levy they set for your school district agrees to what you think it should be. Because if you don't identify it until December when you get your property tax statement in the mail and you see that the levy for your school district is 95 cents instead of $1.05, there's nothing that can be done about that after November 5th.
And I think it's always good to remind districts, we've had districts in that situation and it is not a good situation to be in. So this is one of those critical areas you need to make sure that you're verifying so you don't put yourself in a bad spot and have to borrow and try and make it up in the future years, because it's not a great position to be in.
I'll also mention one thing there is, Bryce, you guys hear from the schools, I hear from the counties, and every year I get a handful of counties calling me freaking out that they realize they set a levy wrong and asking me what to do. So it happens every year. I have at least a few that we hear from that set it incorrectly.
All right, I got another question I'm going to address real quick. And for the record, you guys are doing a great job with questions. Keep them coming. So we love this. This is helpful, I think, to everybody to go through these. So in the budget documents, districts must publish a special hearing to set tax request. Do we publish the date of the joint public hearing or the local district's hearing that occurs after the joint public hearing? You're not going to publish the date of the joint public hearing necessarily, because the county that is having that is sending out the postcards is going to take care of the notification for that joint public hearing. So you're not required to do that. If your district will have to, if you're having, and I don't know, Jeff, are you getting into this? If you're having an additional board meeting after the joint public hearing, which you're probably going to have to do to pass your budget, you're going to have to have your notification in the paper for that, which I don't think probably will be on your special hearing request. It probably should be separate.
Yeah, so previously we kind of had a combo publication that has the budget hearing part of it up top and then the tax request hearing on the bottom. And a lot of times we've done one publication that hits both of those hearings. But if your school district is attending the joint public hearing, that means you don't have to have your own tax request hearing and you would not have to publish that kind of bottom half. You would only have to publish the budget hearing part of it.
The rest is basically taken care of on the note card the county is sending out and their public notification of the meeting coming up.
Okay, so here's the kind of the new form we came up with for this allowable growth. Basically what it is, the way it's set up is to basically fill out automatically based on what you've entered into the budget forms, either on the basic data input tab or elsewhere in the budget. So once you get to this and you've finalized everywhere else in your budget, this should automatically calculate. And basically what it's doing is it's taking our prior year total tax request, adding in our allowable growth percentage and converting that to a dollar amount of what I'm calling base property tax request authority, and then just comparing it to what the actual total property tax request is on your budget. So basically if line 7 is greater than line 6, that means you're over the allowable growth percentage and you would need to attend the joint hearing, be included on the postcard. We touched on this a little bit already, but adopting the budget before the joint public hearing. So like we mentioned, the statutes only require this joint public hearing to be held prior to filing the budget with the county and the state auditor's office. So you could technically have a board meeting prior to this joint public hearing where your school board adopts the budget. That would technically be allowed as long as you don't actually send it into our office until after the joint public hearing. So like I said, technically that's allowed according to the statutes, but maybe a couple things to keep in mind is that if you want to change the tax request or the amount of your budgeted disbursements after the budget's been adopted and after you get input from this joint public hearing, basically you would be required to go through the budget amendment procedures if you want to change the adopted budget. So that would mean doing another publication in the newspaper for the amendment hearing, holding another budget amendment hearing, and then having the school board adopt the amended budget. So if that case happens, you would basically have to go through the process all over again. And I guess kind of my thoughts on the matter is, although technically are allowed, I don't know that that's consistent with the intent of this legislation. Kind of the purpose of this is to give more opportunity for the taxpayers to voice their opinion. And if we've already adopted the budget before we give them that opportunity, I don't know that we're kind of following the intent. But again, it's up to you guys. If you want to adopt the budget prior to this hearing, technically you could do that, and I wouldn't have any reason to say that's not allowed.
And I would just confirm what Jeff's saying, that have had conversations with people over in the Capitol that were behind this bill, and that was not the intent. And there was a bill introduced this session, and it'll come back. The politics of everything that went on over there this year didn't get that bill passed, but they will pass a bill to change that so that it can't be passed before the joint public hearing. So I would side with Jeff and say very strongly recommend that you don't pass your budget before the joint public hearing. Plan on scheduling and having a board meeting after the joint public hearing before September 30th to approve your budget for your board.
And that could mean you only have a couple days. If the county schedules a joint public hearing on September 28th, budget's due September 30th. So that basically gives you one or two, maybe to really one day. I would say one day, the 29th, but I suppose you could have a board meeting on the 30th and still get it sent in. So could be a time crunch there.
Question came in, so this is one we need to clarify. So if the joint hearing is on September 29th, I'll start there. It has to be before September 29th, so the latest your joint hearing can be is September 28th. We have until October 15th to adopt and submit the budget. That would be not correct. You have until October 15th to set your tax request, finalize your tax request amount and submit that. You have until September 30th to adopt your budget. So most schools adopt their budget and set their tax request at the same time. So likely what you just got to do is do that board meeting at the end of September. And that's where you're going to adopt your budget so you can submit it by September 30th. Again, you're not required to set your tax request amounts at that point. Those you have until October 15th to finalize and submit. But most schools do those at the same time, so.
Right, let's see, moving on here. So again, kind of our recommendation for this scheduling issue now is to think about scheduling the budget hearing early, potentially August. So kind of August 20th is the date you get those valuation, and that's kind of the last piece you need to start finalizing the budget. So you might want to think about holding those budget hearings early, get those out of the way. Try to work with the county to schedule that joint hearing as close to September 17th as possible. We'll see how that works out because we also have to give 7 days notice between the date the postcard is mailed by the county to the date of the hearing. So we have a 7-day time frame there too that we have to work with. And then again, try to schedule that board meeting after the joint public hearing to actually adopt the budget. And then just last thing here, again, if any of you have a total tax request that is within the allowable growth percentage, none of this applies. So if you're within the allowable growth percentage, you hold your own tax request hearing. You don't have to give any information to the county. You're not going to be included on the postcard. It's only if you're over the allowable growth percentage.
So a question just came in on that right before you said that. Just to clarify on that question is if none of that applies to you, you are absolutely able to approve your budget at your normal September board meeting as long as your budget hearing was held prior to that board meeting.
All right, here, next slide here, LB 1165. So this bill, I just want to touch on it briefly, clarifies that taxes can be levied for bonds that have been issued, or the key thing here, the change is bonds that have been authorized to be issued by either the governing body or the voters. So as long as that approval has taken place, we could set a bond fund levy for that bond. Let's see. And then budget amendments. Just a reminder here, budget amendments. If any of you are going to have a fund that will have expenditures over the adopted budget, you want to make sure that you're having your school board approve that budget amendment before the end of the fiscal year. Need to make sure to file that amendment with the state auditor's office, NDE, and county clerks. We do have instructions and examples on our website, so you could take a look at those. And then as far as what is required to be submitted to our office, we do not need the full budget all over again. We only need the pages that changed. So typically that's page 2, the adopted budget page, school board minutes where the amendment was approved, and then also proof of publication for where that was published in the newspaper.
Just kind of a reminder there, if you're looking at your budget and really it's a good time to start figuring that out now. You should have a good idea if you're going to need to amend by now. Maybe should be able to estimate out the rest of the expenditures for the fiscal year. Make sure you're looking at all of your funds and not having to go through the amendment process more than once. So if you're checking it out and you see your general fund's going to go over or your nutrition fund's going to go over, make sure your other funds are also in good shape and you're not needing to amend those. So you only got to go through the hassle one time. All right. I don't see any more questions for Jeff, but if more come in, we'll make sure that we get them for you. So I think with that, on to Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Michelle Cartwright. And I am going to go over where you're going to access that school district budget and the LC2 and all information that goes along with that. And as Bryce says, don't hesitate to ask any questions that you might have. We'll address them as we go along. All right, so really important to know is that web address that's at the bottom of the page. This is on our school finance main page. You're going to click on the budget link, and you're going to see all the information that you need for this year's budgeting process. At the top of the page is your current year and prior year budget certifications. And then below that is all the links to the instructions, the link to the APA's website where you're going to get that document that they create, as Bryce mentioned. And also, if some of you haven't noticed on the APA's website, there is instructions on how to complete that budget form. Of course, we're available to answer any questions, but I've recently reviewed that document and it's actually pretty handy on how to complete that document. I did just double check, and there is information on LB 644 of the items that you would need to address in that hearing. So good information there to read. There's your access to the LC2 in the portal. There's instructions on how to complete the LC2. The budget text document that you see there, that goes over everything that goes into putting your budget together. It explains the exclusions, it explains the allowable reserves, just lots of great information that you can refer to year after year as it might pertain to your district.
I would just jump in and say, the people have listened to me before, that's one of the 3 documents that I tell everybody, if you're doing school finance, you need to have that available and handy, printed out or saved or something, bookmarked. That's going to help you with what Jeff was just talking about, amendments and everything too. So Michelle and Stephanie did a great job of updating it and putting additional information in there for LB 644 and everything else too. So make sure you're comfortable with that document. I would star it and put little balloons by it or something if I could. So
get your highlighters up. And then Jeff did talk about a lot of dates, dates that have stayed the same and dates that have changed. We do have it in a nice little document there, the budget timeline, so you can refer to that too as you go along with all the dates, the current dates and the dates that have changed. So a good document there to keep you on track. And then the last few things are all of the exclusions that your district might be able to take advantage of. So there's some explanations there. There's the templates that can be utilized, and Stephanie's going to go over those more later in her presentation. Excellent. All right, so I'm going to go over some of the forms that are in the budget document that Jeff may have touched on as well, but I want to just give you some visuals. So this is a picture of the basic data input page, and it looks familiar to all of you probably, but there's also some lines that have been added, and those lines are going to help you complete the info that's needed for LB 644. Data entered on this page is going to filter to other pages throughout the document, so make sure if you are playing with the numbers, playing with your valuations, that you do go back and actually update those once you do receive your certified documents from the assessor on August 20th. This is the actual general fund worksheet that's in the budget document. You're going to use these pages. All of the funds have 3 columns. So the first column is actually the information you're going to take from your audit, and it should balance. So you want to enter the information line by line. We don't recommend entering pennies, that'll just throw you off. So just round those numbers and make it balanced by rounding those numbers. Middle column is that current year that you're working on right now. So we want you to put your best estimate in there as you're planning, as you're going through the year. And it can be updated as you get closer to the end of the year to make sure you are allowing properly for how your true budget or your true finances are going for the year. And then that last column, the adopted column, that's the budget that you're working on for the future year. So this one, you want to make sure you build in some growth there, take advantage, or make sure you're entering and taking in consideration those increased costs as we're going along with either transportation, fuel costs, what have you. We recommend you get started on entering that information now, and you can update it as you go along. The information on these worksheets then are formulas, and they actually autofill to the other pages and will help you know how your levy's coming about, and really just a great document just to keep working on as you go through getting to the end of the year. So some budget reminders as you're entering some of the numbers is to make sure that you're taking into consideration the recalc or the state aid correction. So you've been given that top number there, that state aid calculated number, that you see the 2.3 million. So you might have had that number, but make sure you go back out to the documents and update and make sure you have that correct number there that's highlighted, and it would be at the bottom of that page. For your county.
Can I jump in on
Yep,
that?
absolutely.
So I would say half of the budgets that I review use the top state aid number instead of the bottom highlighted state aid number that Michelle was talking about there. Where most of you grab that number from is off of the A1 document that gives out shows your formula need and then all the resources in your total calculated aid. That's what the top number is. What Michelle was saying there, that number doesn't include the prior year correction. So you got to make sure that you're using the actual certification document, which is available on the state aid webpage under the drop down menu. You'll just have to look up your district individually if you don't have your prior year correction amount memorized and make that adjustment to A1. So don't use A1 for that number, but that's a common, I bet 50% of the budgets that I review, we got to correct that. So just one of those things that one's a common error to try and help you guys with. Sorry.
No, sorry. Okay, then also motor vehicle taxes, keep this pretty similar to the previous year. Obviously, you don't know what it's going to exactly be, but just put a pretty similar number in there or even raise it just a little bit. And then as for your county treasurer's balance, just estimate from the prior years. So make sure that you're entering those in your current year and your budgeted year. The beginning and ending balances, use your actual balances to start in that first column that are on your audit. Then the second column, you can use those numbers to reach your desired levy. So here is a copy of one of the budget pages that when you enter the information in your fund worksheets, that's going to autofill and move forward. So I just wanted to point out that the state aid number, the motor vehicle taxes, and the county treasurer balances do move forward on this page. As we're reviewing your budgets when they come into us, or as we're helping you with it and as we're approving them, we are looking at these numbers to make sure that they are filled out. Here's that property tax resolution that Bryce and Jeff had mentioned earlier. It was, I think, added new to the document last year, Jeff, if that's correct. So that document is there for you. You don't have to go out, and we are not publishing a separate one on our website now. So that document is actually part of this and will autofill for you and can be used in your approval process and be signed off from your board. So now on to the LC2, and that's the LID computation form is the acronym for that. It's a collection in the ND portal. Each year there's a new collection and a new activation code. We have those LC2 instructions on our school finance page. The budget form is uploaded into that document, and then it auto-populates into the fields that is needed to be completed. If you're a new superintendent this year, to get access to that, as we mentioned before, you do need to register in the NDE portal, and then you'll have all rights to get into those collections. And if you need any help with the NDE portal, there's the phone number and the advisor help email that you can access. That information is in the portal when you log in. So the LC2 purpose, it's confirming that your budget meets the spending limitations and the allowable reserve growth. So when you log into it, you're going to see some things that are pre-populated already in there, and then when you upload your budget document, then it auto-calculates and gives you some warnings or allows you to enter some additional information to complete your budget. So a couple things to note in the LC2 that you will need to manually take advantage of. At the top of the LC2, and if some of you haven't been in there yet, you can use these as reference for later and also as part of the LC2 instructions. So what moves forward from the prior year is your unused budget authority. And below there I have an explanation. So the amount listed is lesser of 2% of the prior year's adjusted general fund expenditures or the prior year's total unused budget authority. Utilizing this number, you can enter the entire amount or you can enter a portion. Not sure why you'd enter a portion. You probably should just go ahead and enter the whole amount because it is accessible to you. But this does provide you additional budget authority for the 22-23 year.
Can I jump in again?
Absolutely.
So one recommendation here with the LC2 that still gets a few people in trouble, and Michelle mentioned this, make sure that I would highly recommend that you're not manually entering these numbers into the LC2. The LC2 does allow you to do that. You can type the numbers in there instead of upload your budget document. It is not uncommon to run into issues when we're trying to troubleshoot or help a district out because they manually entered those numbers in. I would recommend making the changes on your budget document, uploading that. If you're trying to play around and get the numbers to work within the limits, do that every time as opposed to just typing in manually those numbers. It will save you headaches in the long run. That's my recommendation. Along with that, just you can upload and mess around with those numbers many times you want to until you hit the final submit approve button at the end. It'll save that information in there, but you can override it every time. So don't hesitate to do that and work with those numbers to get your budget to be what it needs to be. You ready for the next slide?
Yep, I'm ready. And back to that uploading, make sure when you upload the document that you are hitting that recalculate button at the bottom. That will make sure those new numbers filter through to the bottom of it, and then save. If you don't save, then if you go into your grant fund list and go back and forth, then those numbers you uploaded will disappear. So important to remember, recalculate and then hit save. Again, saving is not hurting anything. It's just saving that information that you uploaded. District approve is what submits it to us.
Probably should note too that we had a program, it affected several of you last year that had 0 for allowable reserves. It was the allowable reserves, right? Yeah. So we had a programming issue last year that many of you ran into where if you had 0 for allowable reserves, it caused an error and you had to manually go in and put that 0 in there. That programming issue is corrected for this year. At least we believe it's corrected. So if it's not, let us know. But we've tested it and I think we have that issue fixed. So that shouldn't be something you have to mess with or shouldn't cause any issues this year like it did last year.
All right, so this slide just a quick overview. If you need more budget authority, you would hold a public vote to exceed your certified budget authority. Again, that certified budget authority is what has been calculated by us. So you would hold that public vote to exceed that. The ballot language must include the statement to include access to expenditure exclusions. Amount approved by public is for 1 school fiscal year. Must budget the total amount approved to carry over for the future years. And then there is a section, I'll show you the next slide, it includes the voter approved amount into the section B of LC2. Next slide, that'll show that to you. So that has been added last year to the LC2. So there is a section now where if you hold that public vote, you would choose yes at B180 and then enter that dollar amount in. Next.
And so just because this is a question I've had probably 10 or more times in the last 6 months, due to all the inflation that's going on, and I promise this isn't a bad joke, but actually a serious issue, more and more conversation around getting a budget authority override. Just one thing to keep in mind with this one, it's a little different than the levy override that we'll probably cover later. Really, it's a one-time thing and it goes into your base moving forward. So if you're up against your budget authority and it's tight, I realize that politically it's not a lot of fun to go out and get an override depending on your district and your situation and circumstances. But if you have a successful budget authority override, that goes into your base and carries forward. So it's not like a levy override and you need to have one every year to go over that threshold. It becomes a new threshold. So it's good to try and get as much as you're going to need in the foreseeable future. And also why we've recommended districts continue to capture as much of their unused budget authority in their base as possible so that they're not running into that exact situation. And I know a lot of you have done that and have plenty of budget authority in your budget, and that may pay off in these next couple of years in a big way. So,
Next slide. As well, if you do the levy override, that part is also included in the LC2. You check yes for that, additional fields pop up, and then you would enter what has been approved, how many years, and the years that will pertain to. So just additional collection of information in the LC2. If you don't have it, you would just leave the box check no. All right, so I wanted to review what total allowable reserves is. So it's a budgeted figure. It helps you with your district cash flow. It's not actual cash in the bank. It's just allowing you to have those, so plan for those extra funds to pay the bills at the end of the year. It's entered into the budget worksheets and then it uploads, auto-populates into the LC2. And then the next slide tells you how that calculation comes about. So your allowable reserve percentage is based on the district's ADM. So if you have, so the allowable reserve percentage is different based on your ADM. If you'd like to see how those percentages play out based on your ADM, that is talked more about in the budget text document. It shows you how that percentage changes based on your average daily membership. So there's some errors that you might receive in the LC2. No dancing monkeys, just bright red lettering. And the LC2 cannot be submitted if you have those error messages. So, if you exceed your budget authority, you'll receive a red number. It'll be a negative, and they'll make you go back and either add additional exclusions or potentially have to reduce your budgeted disbursements. You'll have an error if the budget authority is exceeded, an error if the allowable reserves is exceeded, and then the levy info. The slide prior was to show you how that information needs to be typed in. So if those dates don't match, you're going to get an error there as well. Some budgeting checklist items just to keep in mind. If you're going to claim an expenditure exclusion, you need to get those sent in to Stephanie. Use that LC2 working on the budget. Again, you can upload as many times as you want to make sure you don't exceed your budget authority. Is the budget within spending and levy limits? There's pages that'll show you what your levy is building up to, so you can make sure that you're staying within the limits that your board might have set for you. And then make sure, Bryce spoke about it, make sure that your LC2 and the budget match. So when that budget is finally completed and approved, you want to do one last upload to make sure those numbers are getting in the LC2 correctly. Do you have to have a joint public hearing? There's a worksheet that's going to tell you whether you need to have one, so make sure you're paying attention to that page. Does your hearing notices match the budget document? So review those. And then, of course, making sure that those hearing notices get published in the newspaper. And then you want to confirm that those hearing notices were published in the newspaper. So each year, we get many schools that are having to reschedule their board meetings because the hearing notice didn't get published in the newspaper. So don't wait for that to show up in the mail that it's been published. Maybe you might have to just reach out to the newspaper to make sure it actually was. And then reserve adequate time during your budget hearing for the public to make their comments. Approve the LC2 after your board approves the budget. So I spoke about recalculating and saving. There is actually a button that says district approve. So you want to make sure that you do that. No?
So a common question I get with the wording on those public notices for the budget hearing and your board, if you're going to pass or you're going to have your board meeting after your budget hearing. A lot of times we recommend using language because you don't know the exact start time if you're giving your public adequate time for public comment. So we've recommended, and you can work with your attorneys on this, but using language for that regular board meeting, something to the effect of to follow the budget hearing. So you're not setting a specific time and limiting and getting into a situation where your budget hearing, you're having to limit the public's comment time and getting yourself in trouble there. So just something to consider when you're putting those public notices out there.
On one of the first slides, I have that data input page. You can see the language that he's speaking about typed in there. I did put that in there for helpful notice there. All right, so then again, making sure after the budget is approved, you're submitting those budget documents to NDE, the APA's office, and your clerks. Again, this information is in our budget document or budget text document, and then there is a checklist on the front of the actual budget worksheets that lets you know what needs to go to the APA's office. Make sure you submit that tax resolution to your county, and then back to making sure that tax request is set correctly. So things that we've all talked about already, but just kind of a checklist of things that we've come across over the years that get forgotten. So back to submitting budget documents to NDE. Once you hit the district approve button, the LC2 does go into a mode where it's going to be asking you for your documents. So make sure you review the checklist of what's required to be submitted to NDE. You're going to PDF all those listed items into one single document, one single PDF, and then you're going to upload that in the LC2. You're going to receive confirmation, auto-generated confirmation emails when you hit district approve. You're going to receive a generated email when you upload your PDF documents. And then as Stephanie and I are reviewing the budgets and approving, you're going to get an email from us when we hit ND approved. So be looking for those emails. They're not cause for concern, just kind of keeping you up to date of what the processes that have been accomplished with the LC2. Really important, do not mail in any of those documents to NDE. We just want them uploaded through the LC2. So end of year budget reminders for the current year. You should be reviewing the budgets that are approved to make sure you're not going to overspend on your disbursements. If there's spending authority that's remaining in the general fund, you may want to transfer to the other funds. You could transfer to the appreciation fund, the employee fund, school nutrition activity fund. So make sure you're utilizing those budgeted funds. So any unspent general fund budget authority will increase 22-23 beginning general fund cash balance. So things that could cause you to amend the current budget. And as a reminder, the hearing notices need to be published and the board approved by August 31st. So make sure you're looking at that now. You can hold off till August, but everything has to be completed by that August 31st date. So things to think about that may cause you to amend. Many schools have been contacting us. They're refinancing their bonds to get lower interest rates. Maybe you had some summer building projects that due to supply costs, you're spending more money. So your building fund may be running over budget. Then a real common one is that lunch fund can be running over budget, and typically a lot of those are amended in the summertime. So really it's just now's the time to review your year-to-date spending on all funds just to see how it's lining up with what you had actually budgeted. So amending the budget. Also, all funds must be amended before being overspent. So hearing notice to amend, you want to show the budget is originally adopted. You want to show the proposed amended budget. You would only have to show the actual funds that do need to be amended. You wouldn't have to reprint the entire hearing notice on that. Then you want to give a rationale for amending. And then make sure you're adding a statement that will not impact the tax request for the current year. documents required to submit, and Jeff did mention some of these already, but again, just go over proof of publication, your board minutes, and page 2 of the budget document need to be submitted to all 3 entities. There is more information in our budget text document that helps you with amending the budget, and of course, contact Stephanie or I, and we can help you navigate that process and give you some examples if needed. So if you do amend your current year budget, the LC2 does need to be amended if you are amending the general fund, the depreciation fund, or the employee benefit fund cash reserve. This could also have impact over that allowable reserves. So make sure, again, that you're contacting us for help, and then we would need to also unlock the LC2 for you to change those numbers that are in there for those funds. So that's all on the budget. Just real quick, wanted to touch base on the enrollment option program. Myself and Kevin are your contacts if you have any questions. Currently, there was no changes to the program. That's the rule. If you're bored and would like to read that document, it's posted on our website. And then the directions as well on, or some FAQs. Next page, next slide. And then there's the application. So each May, we revise the document and repost it on our website. So make sure that you're downloading that, linking to that on your web pages, and are using the most current version go forward. If you need a Spanish version, reach out to us and we can provide that for you. Questions that have come to us is that the application should be retained until the student graduates or reaches the age of 21. And again, there's the program contacts if you have any questions on it. If we don't know the answer, we can bubble it up to our legal team, and as well, you could reach out to your legal counsel if there's questions or concerns. And more importantly, I had to get one joke in to add to Bryce's, but rule number 1 in the budget is don't sweat the small stuff. Number 2, it's all small stuff. So reach out before you freak out. We're here to help you. Email us, call us, whatever we can do to help you navigate this wonderful budget process.
All right. You had no questions that whole time, so man, Jeff, she had a lot of those questions.
She must have done a good job.
All right, Stephanie's gonna cover budget levy and spending exclusions for you.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. For those of you that haven't met me yet, I took Janice's spot, so tough shoes to fill, but I'm glad to be here. Today I'm going to talk to you about general fund exclusions. The districts have 2 types of exclusions available to allow for more flexibility in budgeting. The exclusions provide the districts the ability to exceed statutory limitations in their budgets through the $5 levy limit and the certified budget authority, which is calculated and certified by NDE each spring. The levy exclusions are listed on the left side of Schedule B on your budget documents. Approval to access the additional levy occurs when the school board approves the school district budget. There are several more expenditure exclusions available to districts. Most of these will need to be approved by the State Board of Education. Next slide, please. There are 3 types of levy exclusions: levying for funds to repay the annual bond and interest outside of the $5 levy limit. The levy exclusions are available in the general fund, bond fund, and QC-PUF fund. The cost of voluntary termination agreements paid during the upcoming school year also outside of the $5 levy limit. This is also an expenditure exclusion, so the amounts on both the levy and the expenditure exclusions would likely be the same. Judgments that are not covered by liability insurance would also work in the same way. The State Board of Education approval is required for most expenditure exclusions, except for in 2 categories. First, the category is your SPED budget. So special education budget costs, which include SPED transportation, preschool SPED, and SPED transportation. The second would be SPED-related student services, and those are usually included in service codes 2100s, but not the 2190s. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
The second type of expenditure exclusions that do not need state board approval, the grants listed are your grants listed on the LC2. The grants that do not need to be individually approved, the reason why is because there was a blanket approval by the state board earlier this spring. So you can find those located on your LC2. I have a highlight here that says special grant funds. And if you click on that, all of those pre-approved grants are listed there. The items located at the bottom of the special grants fund, which do require state board approval since they will be specific to your district, are things such as insurance settlements, inter-fund loans, reimbursements for wards of the court, repayments for county government for previous overpayments, short-term borrowing, grants from city and county governments, and grants from corporations, foundations, and other private interests. Some examples of that would be insurance settlements, amounts received from an insurance company to cover damages. It may be easier to deposit some of those funds directly into your special building fund so that you don't have to have state board approval when you need to spend those funds, something to consider. They also wouldn't impact per pupil cost if recorded out of the special building fund, something to consider. Inter-fund loans, back one slide, please. Thank you. Inter-fund loans, when you make a loan from the general fund to another taxing fund, or you are using budget authority and you can get additional budget authority by requesting this exclusion. You have 2 years to repay another taxing fund for an inter-fund loan. On the other side, if you made a loan from another taxing fund to the general fund, the repayment of this loan will be used as budget authority from the general fund. I'm okay for the next slide. Thank you. Once you apply for these grants, they will be, and they are approved, they will be automatically added to your LC2, so they will appear in the first section of your LC2. These grants will remain in the budget base when budget authority is calculated the following spring. So it's important that you include the total amount in your general fund budget.
I'm gonna interrupt. I got a question. Can you deposit insurance claim checks into depreciation and pay for repair improvements out of there as well as the special building fund? The answer to that is no. Anything that gets into the depreciation fund has to go through the general fund. If you're just going to be making a repair or maintenance type of purchase, you can do that directly out of the general fund. It doesn't make a lot of sense to move it to the depreciation fund. That's more of a long-term save up for big purchases. If you're up against budget authority, is really the purpose of the depreciation fund. So most likely you're going to probably deposit that insurance check into your special building fund. That's probably what makes the most sense, and do that repair work out of the building fund. You can do repairs and maintenance out of the general fund. So that is the other option, but you wouldn't deposit directly into the depreciation fund. All right, go on.
There are a few districts that receive state aid for new elementary attendance site allowance. So you could request this exclusion to cover the increased cost of opening new elementary sites. This would include all staff salaries and benefit costs. It would include cost of custodial staff and maintenance costs. If you are needing more budget authority, you might want to check your state aid certification document to see if your district is eligible. This year, 3 districts are eligible to access this expenditure exclusion. It is posted on our FOS website, and we have also contacted those school districts to make sure they are aware, and will encourage that they request the state board approval. I have updated on the FOS website, under budgeting, I have updated the templates that you will need. This is the Early Childhood Education Grant template, and there it is also listed 3 schools that qualify and the amounts. If you have any questions on those, please feel free to email me. All exclusions will be emailed to me directly. You can also email them to Michelle, but she'll probably just forward them to me, so go ahead and email me. All right, next one. Retirement incentive and staff development. This is only available for the first year of the reorganization of new districts. Costs for setting up a retirement incentive program and providing staff development opportunities due to the reorganization qualify. If you have any questions about this, give us a call and we will walk you through this exclusion. Schedule A is where you will list any of your grants that need state board approval. This is where you will list them on your budget documents. Again, make sure you email me to seek approval before you list them on here.
Ready for the next one?
Ready? Repairs to infrastructure damaged by a natural disaster, such as flooding, tornadoes, wildfires. We've had several wildfires this year, so this is something to consider. It may be easier just to make the repairs out of the special building fund so that you wouldn't need to take the time to request state board approval. However, you can do it that way as well. This would not impact per pupil cost. Next slide. Judgments not covered by liability insurance would be judgments entered against a district that obligates the district to pay. It does not include orders from the Commission of Industrial Relations. Next slide. Distance education courses. To qualify, a district must be providing distance education courses through ESU coordinating councils to other schools. The exclusion is the amount received as payment from another school. Here's an example of voluntary termination agreements. It includes certificated teachers up to $35,000 per person. It does not have to be cash. It could be insurance coverage could be included. Incentives paid within 5 years or prior to the teacher being Medicare eligible, whichever comes first, you must show the 5-year savings in this, on your document, you must show 5-year savings. You cannot include a collective bargaining agreement, and the template is on the FOS website under budget documents. The retirement contribution increase exclusion is for the difference between the district's contribution rate of oh, Bryce, I think you're on the wrong slide. I think there's a duplicate slide in there. Thank you. So the retirement contribution increase is the difference between the 9.88% of the statutory rate and the statutory rate of 7.35%. Native American Impact Aid may fluctuate each year. The request may not be what you anticipate to receive. The available districts, it is available with those with Native American land within the district boundaries and receive federal impact aid due to students residing on Native American land. Again, the templates are available on the FOS website. They will pre-calculate for you once you start to fill them in. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a call. or email me. Send requests to NDE via email. Provide details of your grant request, name and purpose of the grant, amount of the grant. Use the templates provided on the FOS website. Include your district agency ID. Be sure to round all amounts, and then please email in PDF format. Here's a list, which can also be found on the FOS website, of the the upcoming state board meetings. Note there's no meeting in July. And on the left would be the date that I would need to have your request in order to reach the next state board meeting deadline. If there's any questions, you always can give me a call. Once the state board has approved the grant request, we will post those within 5 working days after the state board meeting under the budget related information on the FOS website. Note the FOS website is listed below.
I'm going to jump in here real quick, and just a reminder that if you are working on completing your budget, you don't have to wait for the state board's approval or this to show up to go ahead and include that exclusion amount on your budget. Once you've requested it or put it in there, go ahead and add it to your budget and make sure that the state board does approve it, but you can keep working and keep moving your budget forward, assuming that it will be approved by the state board.
Thank you, Bryce.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I have for today.
All right. No other questions there. So Kevin, you're up.
All right, I'm sort of the little speed bump before we get to Bryce, which all of you are probably sitting on your edge of the seat. So I'm going to review a few things for state aid here that I'm finishing up over the next 2 days, and then pretty much the month of July before I start the recalc in August. Lump sum payments for the 21-22 positive prior year correction. If they're equal to or greater than 1,000, we will send you an email to those districts that have a positive prior year correction of over 1,000. We'll notify you, and then you must respond to the school finance Indy email. Do not respond to me directly. Please respond to the email that's sent out. You can CC me if you have questions. But respond by August 15th, and then on or before September 15th, district notifications of board approval will be accepted. And as Bryce mentioned, please go ahead and include that in that state aid number. And keep in mind, as was brought up, you have a 22-23 state aid certification number, but this prior year correction may increase that or decrease it depending on your district with that prior year correction. Less than 1,000, you do not need to provide an application. We'll just make that payment to you in the month of December. Next slide. State of change and school district boundaries due to annexation by a city or village. If you have valuation that's been annexed by another district, please request that form, and I have my information there. We will get that sent out to you as soon as possible so you can get the forms filled out, and those are due by August 20th, so I can get them to Department of Revenue, so any adjustments that need to be made can be made. They get me the new information, and then I will adjust the certification for any school districts that are affected by annexation, whether you gain valuation or whether you decreased in valuation. TIOSA document is posted on our webpage. Again, since we certified on February 23rd, this is the most updated document. Please utilize that to identify the components of equalization aid, all the resources with more detailed information. And again, that's available on the webpage. Consolidated data collections. I'm currently working with school districts on their instructional program hours. Stephanie has been working with pupil transportation. Good to know that pupil transportation, we are down to one school district, so we're happy with those that have responded and got that corrected, and we're trying to get that taken care of as the audit window closes on the 30th, which is tomorrow. I'm also working with school districts on your average daily membership. We have one district that is not reporting that in Advisor. And if you have not heard from me, your district is sitting comparable or reasonable to what you had last year to this year compared to fall membership over the last 2 years, and then your last year's average daily membership and your current year average daily membership. However, I would encourage you, if you're on this webinar, to take one last look at that just to ensure that you feel confident that is correct. That comes from your school information system, which we pull every night through Advisor, and then that's the number that I will use for the recalculation coming up in the next month.
I'm gonna pause. There was a comment in the chat that said the form is probably a mute point if a district is not equalized. I'm assuming that comment is in regards to the annexation document, and I would agree with that as long as the amount that's being annexed is not enough valuation to push a district from being non-equalized into equalization aid. So just a quick note to say, make sure even if you're a non-equalized district that's having land annexed out of your district, that you make sure that if you're close or the amount of land being annexed is significant enough to reduce your resources enough to make you an equalized district, then it could or may matter. But likely that very well could be the case, that it may not be anything that matters to you if you're significantly non-equalized and not losing enough valuation to change that fact. So just wanted to point that out as a good clarification in the chat there. So
yeah, I appreciate that from the chat. Also, to further answer that question, if it affects two school districts on annexation that are in two different ESUs, then that annexation applies to those ESUs, and I would have to go in and put those new annex values between the two ESUs that are involved. We did have that situation last year for the first time. We were able to get through it and make the adjustment. It didn't amount to much to the ESU, but it was pretty significant when we're dealing with the state aid certification and the ESU core services.
great. Next slide.
Yeah. Next.
I'm trying. Here we go.
As I mentioned with Advisor, I did a fall membership comparison. In fact, I got the most updated one early this morning, which I've already got it worked, and that was showing the difference there of average daily membership and fall membership. Again, this is very important when we're dealing with getting ready for the recalculation, because certification, I use the fall membership, and for the recalculation, I use the average daily membership. So please compare those numbers in your Advisor so that you can feel confident that they are correct. So when I start the recalculation, because once we lock that data and I start the recalculation, there's no opportunity to fix those numbers. Next. The 22-23 recalculation, as I mentioned, certification was assessed values, fall membership, and your annual financial report. The recalculation, the difference is I do the average daily membership and not fall membership. I use the certified valuation, and that includes any annexations as well. And then any amendments that school districts had on your 2021 annual financial report. You've been working with Michelle and Stephanie on those. Hopefully we have those all completed by July 15th, and I will pull all those amended numbers from the school districts and then utilize the most current information for the recalculation.
And just to clarify, because I think we use the word amended in a couple different situations here. Jeff earlier and Michelle talked a little bit about amending your budget. You have until that has to be finalized by the end of the fiscal year, which is the end of August, to amend your budget. To amend your AFR, that has to be done by July 15th, since we cut that off since the recalculation begins, and that needs that updated information at that time. So that's the different dates they're amending. We're talking about amending two different things, the AFR and the budget document, just to clarify. 22-23 recalculation, again,
certification, we use a local effort rate of 1.0. For the recalculation, that local effort rate may be adjusted because it'll be a balancing factor between the total certified and then the total recalculation to make sure that they are equal. And so that may adjust that LER just a little bit.
And the local effort rate is what's used to multiply by the certified valuation. So essentially what they're doing is changing your valuation, or what the formula counts as a resource that you can tax against to balance that. That's what the local effort rate does, just for those that are newer to this.
And then we talked about prior year correction. For example, the 21-22 certification, the difference between that and the 21-22 recalculation will create that prior year correction. And then we include that prior year collection into your 22-23 TIOSA certified aid. And again, if it's a positive correction, that's going to increase your certified number. If it's a negative correction, it's going to decrease your certified number. And as mentioned earlier in our presentation, please use that corrected number. And that comes from your state aid component sheet, which you can download from our website. LEP and poverty expenditure requirements. We take the 21-22 expenditures as far as the 117.65%. So on the coding for these two, you're looking at the 1150s and 1160s. And then what it will do is the reports are identified on our website. And what we do is we post that number as I start the certification. I will pull those from the consolidated data collection. That's where you identify your total LEP expenditure requirement and your poverty requirement. And then those will be used when I start the certification on 2023 and 24. And again, these are in the consolidated collection. So make sure that you're looking at those if you have any questions. The number that 117.65%, we do have it posted under the LEP expenditure requirement and poverty requirement on our webpage. If you need a little bit more details or explanation on that, please call me. That's significant because every 2 years we do a LEP correction and a poverty correction. And if you don't meet those requirements, you could have a negative correction based on actual numbers from 2 years previously. And that goes for both LEP and poverty. Fall membership reporting. And again, this will be for the upcoming fall. We take the fall membership from the districts reported as of October 1st. Qualified early childhood education fall membership is also due on October 1st. There's my contact information if you have any questions.
All right. Well, if Kevin says he's the speed bump before you get to me, that means I must be the wall that we're about to smash into. So I apologize, but I think that's usually my role, is to bring the fun news, or every once in a while, maybe I get to say something fun and the rest of the time, not as much, but I'm going to flow through quite a few things here in a short amount of time. We're going to go a little bit of everywhere. I get to cover kind of everything that didn't fit into anybody else's presentation. So I guess hang with me a little bit, but I think we did cover this just briefly. We talked about the AFR amendments and those being due by July 15th. If that's something you're going to need to do quickly, we have out on the FOS webpage. If you go into there, there's an amendment section that gives you the template and the instructions on how to do that. Just a quick little screenshot of what that kind of looks like there. So you can contact Michelle and Stephanie. They'll walk you through that process. One of the big things with that, why we see, and this is going to kind of tie into a lot of what we talk about as far as submitting your AFR, which I'm going to start with kind of covering that stuff. The maintenance of effort, MOE, and this is not to be confused with maintenance of equity, which I'll get to talk about in a little bit. And that would probably be the wall that we're hopefully not going to smash into. But maintenance of effort was probably the biggest reason that we see AFR amendments. Basically, you're not spending what you spent the previous year on your special education costs. Or really what's going on is you didn't code enough to those special education expense accounts. And so after the fact, you're having to correct that, and that's the reason for the amendment. The other side of, or the other common occurrence for amendments for the AFR is because you're going to submit your final financial report, which is where you get your state reimbursement for sped costs not covered from federal funds. And that new report that was developed 2 years ago now goes out and it matches the annual financial report. So it's a really good system actually to make sure that you're not requesting reimbursement for more than what you're coding to those qualifying special education accounts. Where people run into the issue is they don't code enough to those or what should be coded to those account codes. And then when they go to claim reimbursement, they're trying to request more than what they coded to the annual financial report to those qualifying accounts. We created a report last year, it was kind of the first year for it, and it was a little rough, and it didn't exactly do everything how we wanted it to. We've got it corrected and fixed. Use that report. Now we'll talk about that when we get to uploading your AFR, but just know that both the maintenance of effort and what's going to count as maintenance of effort for your district and what's going to be qualifying final financial report amounts, there is a report available when you are submitting your AFR that gives you those amounts. So that shouldn't be a surprise. You should be able to see those ahead of time and know what's coming down the road when you work on your special education maintenance of effort and final financial report. So we're really trying to make that user friendly and give you guys a heads up. So that you can, if it's not what you want, that's the best time to make those corrections before your auditors have walked out the door or before you've done that final submission. The other thing there is just making sure you're coding contracted services to the 1100 or 1200s, or that's been done and they should be coded to the 2100s. I think a lot of you are catching on to that now since this is year 4 of the new coding system. That's less and less, but we're still seeing a little bit. And then just a reminder that you don't want to code more sped expenditures to federal accounts than what you're getting in revenue, because essentially what you're doing then is you're giving up revenue that you can request reimbursement, at least if it's K through 12 or school aged, from the state. So you want to make sure that you're only coding expenses to those federal accounts that you're going to get reimbursed for. And right along with that, just a reminder that it always makes sense to use your birth to school age sped expenditures, use your federal money for that because the state doesn't reimburse for that. It's just a way to maximize your reimbursements as a school district, make that school aged amount the part that the state reimburses you for, or at least portion of it. So on the annual financial report, just a couple of issues we continue to see as we get ready for the end of the fiscal year and submitting that information. Maybe the summer's a time where you can go back and review it and check and make sure that you have this stuff in order, but make sure you're coding correctly to the 700s. If you're capitalizing, is when items are individually over 5,000. So again, if you purchased a whole bunch of laptops that are $1,500 a piece, in total that may be over 5,000, but you wouldn't capitalize that because it's individually. Also, if you have large expenditures using federal money, that you should be using object code 395 and 396 for those codes, just to make sure that we're tracking appropriately what can be included in indirect cost when we do that calculation. Also want to note, Michelle and Stephanie have done a fantastic job of getting the user's manual and the master code list out sooner than ever. I think we had both those out in December this year, which is awesome, and I think makes things easier for you guys to know what codes are going to be available for the current year. The sooner we can get that out, the better. We do have to make some revisions to that throughout the year based on changes either from state laws or federal requirements or requests from auditors, school districts, whatever that makes sense. We review those and do have to kind of fine tune those. We put a final version out the first part of May. So that means that what's out there and available now, if you're using an older version, you need to update that and make sure that you're using the final version. That's what is going to be allowable in the AFR system when you upload. So the very last bullet there, test your upload file. That's the time to do that is now. What we're seeing still is that districts are, I think we had maybe less than half that had tested their upload file when the AFR opened on October 1st last year. And we're still running into significant issues in the account codes that are available or that they're trying to use that are not available. Keep in mind that AFR system only, as the bottom little picture there says, there's no room for error. The AFR upload file has to match what an allowable code. Even if you're using other things at your district, it has to be crosswalked into an allowable code. So you can test all that. That has been available since we put out the master account code list in December. So now is the time to check that final version. Make sure that what you're going to be using or uploading in October is an allowable account. This test upload site only checks account codes to make sure they're valid. It doesn't check all the other stuff that the AFR system checks until we get to that end date. It just, because you're still updating numbers, doing journal entries and stuff like that, it doesn't make sense to do all the other stuff. We just want to make sure that your account codes are correct. If you're running into account codes that are incorrect and you need help figuring out what that should be crosswalked to or changed to, Michelle and Stephanie are great resources, but Kevin and I can help you walk through that as well. The value of building and contents. This really is a big piece. Per pupil cost is becoming a bigger and bigger deal, and especially with maintenance of equity now, again, which I'm going to cover in a second. But make sure that as you get ready to complete your AFR, that you have your value of building and contents correct, that you're allocating those out to the appropriate buildings based on, if you have an elementary building, it's pretty easy to say that and allocate that building and the contents of that building out to an elementary building so that it gets appropriately added to the per pupil cost of that elementary. There's going to be some things that you're going to have to code to the district level, just like you do with your regular expenditures, bus barns, administration buildings, athletic fields. Those can make sense to code to the district wide. You can allocate those different ways too. We've provided flexibility in the system to let you do what's most appropriate. So if you have a football field that just your high schools, if you're a larger school district and just your high schools are using that football field, that should be coded, that cost or the I guess value of that field should be split amongst your high schools, not including your elementaries if they're not using it. So those are the types of flexibilities that are available. Yeah.
We have a question on the chat concerning coding. Sorry, but did you say use 600 in general fund, but when you're coding with federal money, you would use 395, 396 instead of 600?
You would use 395 and 396 when you have contracts for services or goods or whatever, and that's the over $25,000 or below $25,000 codes. You would use those, but that would just be for federal funds. Correct. Talking about allocating out expenses. So again, when the law changed a couple years ago and we did the wonderful coding change that everybody loved, the requirement was that we had to get per pupil cost out to the building level. That means that we require you, when you're coding your expenses, to determine if those should be coded to an elementary, to a high school, what buildings those should be coded to. The system that takes your AFR it requires essentially that you code at least 50% of your expenses out to the school building level, not to the district level. If it's coded to the district level, we're going to allocate it out based on the average daily membership in those buildings that you have. But we're saying at least 50% of it has to be coded to the building level by you. We've had a few districts run into that each year yet. I really think that the number should be closer to 70 or 80%. Just when you take staff alone costs, that's what usually a district has in staffing costs. Most staffing costs can be allocated out. Some can't and is shared across the district. Things like your superintendent, business manager, those things may make sense to code to the district level, but they can also be split out to the building level as well. So just depending on your situation or circumstances. The AFR system opens October 1st, just like it has in the past. When that opens, the AFR testing website will close. There's no longer a need for that. It's time to get into the live system. You can upload as many times as you need to into that live system. highly recommend that you're not waiting till your auditor has everything finalized to start that process. You should be able to upload some preliminary files into the AFR system and start working through. You can start entering your building and contents in there, which we'll talk about in a second, but you need to start working through all the other errors and issues in there as well. You can go back and fine tune it if you're waiting for an auditor to get a final file or final version of your AFR to you. When you're submitting that, again, preliminary reports uploaded there, I would closely review those reports. We're going to talk about that. If you're one of the larger school districts in our state, the system may take a few minutes to upload your entire file that you're sending in there. Those files can be quite large, so just be patient with that. Once you have successfully uploaded a file, again, you're not going to get a successful upload if you have invalid account codes that you're trying to upload to. So that's, again, should all be worked through before you get to this step. Once you have a successful file upload, you're going to get that View Data tab. That's where you're going to start working through all the other fun stuff that you need to do that isn't in the test system. That's including the building and contents that we just talked about. Your beginning ending balances for each fund, you'll have to enter those in there. Once that's done, then you can start looking at the reports that are available. The reports that are available were directed by you guys. When we created this system, we took a lot of input and had a lot of people sit on a panel with us who direct us and let us know what you guys needed to see to make sure that the numbers you're submitting were accurate. So know that is information that your colleagues and you have requested. That's what we're providing so that you can make sure the data is correct. This is what the page looks like. So it has a lot of different options for you. We've created a lot of different reports. Again, I'm highlighting the SPED report. That's a key one. Again, based on just the amendment issues that we've run into. A couple other of the key ones, the NEP per pupil cost report over on the right side. That's going to be what gets released on the Nebraska Education Profile. That's the public facing site that shows per pupil cost. That matches. That's going to tie out exactly to what gets released in roughly the end of January timeframe we're aiming for. Know that information, be prepared to answer that. And if it doesn't look right, now's the time to correct it. We can't correct it in January. So that's available for you. Also, the review of district funds AFR summary. That's going to be that's a report that's built specifically to tie out to what your auditors are required to submit. I have that. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but know that should be used by both your auditor, it should be used by you, and that will be used by us when we tie out your annual financial report to your audit. Those are key ones that we use often. I think you guys should be using too. So speaking of school district audits, your auditors are going to be coming out. I know a lot of them have probably already been in contact with you. They're doing their audit basically at a district level. So most of the test work is done there. We do ask them now that Rule 1 has been updated and approved by the governor, which was done in the middle of audit season last year, to do some testing at the school building level. We want to make sure that those expense allocations you're doing make sense, that there's not things that are going on there that are incorrect. Also, as part of that rule update, we require them to submit a supplemental schedule in a specific format. That's out on our website. We've been working with the auditors to do that. Because the rule wasn't finalized till the middle of the audit season last year, we didn't require it. We still have a few audit firms that are not doing that. And so make sure that yours is. That format looks like this. It's fairly simple. But again, it was designed to tie out to that report in the AFR system so that we can easily tie out the two. It works so that the public, if they have issues, can tie out and see that your AFR matches the audit. As well as us when we test it, and you, the auditors, everybody that needs to see this information and know that it's been audited and correct. This format and these schedules allow us to do that easily. So while I'm talking about audits, I do want to note, we've had a lot of conversations with schools. We know that finding school district auditors right now has become more challenging than ever. We're aware of that fact. We started working with the school district auditors on ways to resolve that issue. Have been having conversations with them. several different ideas have been thrown out. We're in the process of exploring those ideas, trying to figure out what we can do to make this simpler for auditors, for the school districts, and still make sure that we're having the information checked in an appropriate way. Remembering that school districts are spending $4 billion of state and local money, that we want to make sure that that's accurate. So there's a lot that goes into it. It won't be a real quick process to get that changed, I don't believe, but we are working to try and resolve that issue. In the meantime, we do have, if you are one of the districts that's trying to search for an auditor and can't find anybody, we put together a list last year of all the audits that we received from school districts and who their audit firm is and their location. Michelle, Stephanie, Kevin, or I can get that to you, so you can go down the list and check. But do know that we have heard you and know that that's becoming an issue. We're working to resolve it as quickly as possible. Along with that, just a reminder, I know not all of you have business managers or bookkeepers who have been in their role for a long time and are real comfortable with the financial side of things. You are required to have an individual capable of overseeing your financial statement preparation at your district. If there's nobody capable of overseeing the financial statement preparation, you have to have a separate audit firm do your audit as who is helping you with your financial statements. So if you have an accounting firm helping you get your finances in order, and there's nobody at your district who understands them well enough to say, yeah, that's right or wrong what they're doing, then you need to hire two separate accounting firms, because essentially an audit firm shouldn't be auditing their own work. That's the issue there that we're trying to make sure is not occurring. That's not an NDE rule. That's a generally accepted accounting rule. So know that that's the case. That does not mean that you have to have somebody on your staff that can put financial statements together. That's not what overseeing financial statement preparation means. It means you need to understand and be able to look at them and say, this is right or wrong, and know if there's something incorrect in those financial statements as far as, I would say, materially wrong. I think this is key. So we're switching gears to federal funds and the money that came from the federal government during the COVID shutdown. The CARES Act money, we are a long ways down the reimbursement process of that, but know that we do still have some funds left that have not been reimbursed. Those obligation period is, those funds have to be obligated prior to September 30th of this year for the first round, the CARES Act. Round 2 has to be obligated a year from September 30. So that was the Carissa. And then the last round of ARP funds have to be obligated prior to September 30, 2024. Those dates are coming up quicker. They're coming up quickly. And we have a long ways to go on round 2 and round 3. So just make sure, I know a lot of you have plans out there. Make sure that you are moving forward on that. What I will tell you is the federal government has been in contact with us, and we've NDE sat with, along with a couple other states, on calls with the federal government. They're looking at extending the period of completion on that. They do not have the ability to extend the obligation date. So all those funds will have to be obligated by those dates that are put up there. But they're looking at extending, instead of 120 days after those dates to have those funds fully spent, they're looking at extending that to possibly 18 months. The process for that and who's going to qualify is a little bit up in the air. They haven't finalized that yet, but they've specifically heard a lot around some of the maintenance, the HVAC work that schools are using those funds for, not being able to get that equipment in. There being backlogs. And so they're looking at giving schools, the contract would have to be signed by September 30th, obligating it, but you may have longer to get that actually spent. So I know I've had conversations with several of you, and that may be very beneficial to you. That's not finalized yet, so you can't take it to the bank, but it's looking very likely they're moving in that direction. The details are yet to be worked out, and as soon as we know those, and I would assume hopefully by admin days, we'll have the details on that. I will make sure that you get that information and know what it's going to take. They've talked about states having to apply for that. Know that we will do that for you if that is an option. Still recommend spending those funds as quickly as possible, as responsibly and as efficiently and wisely as possible. Maintenance of equity. So this is really important for the 34 districts. I have 42, I think in there, 42 schools, 34 districts that were required to meet maintenance of equity. So maintenance of equity, we sent out an email. Stephanie helped me out, sent an email out last Friday that 34 districts that are subject to maintenance of equity have to follow up on. Maintenance of equity was a requirement that came attached to the third round of the government funds, the ARP ESSER funds. When you applied for those funds and signed off in GMS and submitted your application, you signed off that you would comply with maintenance of equity. We've put quite a bit of information out there around maintenance of equity. Essentially what it said is you wouldn't reduce per pupil funding at your highest poverty schools or reduce staffing at those highest poverty schools. The good part about maintenance of equity is, you see on the left side there, any school that had under 1,000 enrollment in K through 12 was exempt. You did not have to comply with maintenance of equity. Along with if you had only one school per grade range, that also exempted you. So out of the 244 school districts, only 34 were still had to comply. We had to, back in January or February, we had to get the highest poverty schools from you. We got that step and you guys identified those high poverty schools. Hopefully this is all ringing a bell to you 34 districts. Now, just recently, the federal government has said and clarified a little bit more and gave another exemption to maintenance of equity. Essentially, kind of the backstory is, I don't believe the federal government has time to follow up on all the districts that were subject to maintenance of equity still. And so they said, hey, if your per pupil cost overall at your district is increasing, we're going to give you an exemption. You don't have to comply with maintenance of equity. You have to show us that that's the case for each year that maintenance of equity applies. So maintenance of equity applies to your FY22, which is the current fiscal year we're in, the 21-22 year. It also applies to the upcoming school year, 22-23. What we sent out on Friday said, all right, we need to know from you, 34 districts that are still, that were required to follow maintenance of equity under the original exemptions. Did your per pupil funding increase for 21-22? You'll have to submit this to us each year that it applies. If it did, you are exempt and you don't have to worry about anything else. It's going to make your life easier. It's going to make our life easier. The nice thing is the federal government said you can show this to us in a couple of different ways. It can be using your budgeted numbers. So you obviously at this point know what you budgeted for the 21-22 school year. It's almost over. It can be using your allocated numbers. What did you allocate for 21-22 compared to 20-21, which was the base year, right? So we know those. You can also use actual. We won't know actual numbers until December, won't be finalized and firmed up. So I guess just make sure that understand it can be any of those different options. And that's what that email on Friday said. Here's the key though, and where I think most people are missing what the feedback I'm getting is, what we're looking at is only the state and local per pupil cost. The federal government says we don't care about the federal money coming in. We want to know that you're spending as much or more with your state and local dollars in your district in 21-22 as compared to 20-21. So that's what we need to see. If that's you, all you have to do is complete that Appendix B that was attached to that email on Friday and submit support showing how you calculate that. We don't need a lot of detail. I don't need board approvals, any of that. We just need to see the numbers, know what those numbers are so we can easily see, yep, you budgeted more per pupil than for 21-22 than you did for 20-21. I hate to give Millard too much credit, but they did a really good job of putting that in an Excel document, and they gave me permission to email out that template. If any of you 34 districts would like help on what maybe I'm looking for, just to assure that that is actually the case and we're in compliance with maintenance of equity. So you can send me an email. I'll send you out there just a template of what they kind of put together, which was, again, really good. Really good job of showing their total expenditures, backing out the federal expenditures to come up with a total, and then they just divided it by their October 1 counts to come up with a per pupil amount of state and local. So that's all we're looking for. It's pretty simple. It doesn't need to be fancy. Just show us that, and we can get you on the exempted list. So we have to publish that by July 8th. So we really need you 34 districts to respond to that quickly. ESSER fund monitoring. I know this is really exciting to all of you. We are required on those ESSER funds, again, to come out and do additional monitoring with that large of, I guess, funds coming out to school districts. There's extra monitoring. We knew that would come with chains, and now's the fun part. So what they've begun, our fiscal monitoring team has begun that work. The common issues they're finding. So this, if you haven't been monitored yet, make sure you're documenting this stuff or taking care of it. Make sure if you're using these ESSER funds, like we've said from the very beginning, for construction projects, that you are documenting your publication of requests for bids. You're displaying posters and wage determinations on boards outside of project sites. You're using correct wage determinations. This is all the Davis-Bacon stuff. It has been an issue, and it was anticipated that would be the case. It's really challenging to follow all the rules of Davis-Bacon. Make sure that you're doing that. You probably need to be working with your attorney to make sure that you're doing that. If you're purchasing things like vans, you need to document why the equipment was needed. Like, for example, vehicles need for new routes, bids, your sales agreements, policy for capitalization, depreciation. If you're using federal funds, that's a requirement. So all of that is what kind of comes along with those federal funds. So program monitoring is also required. We're working on finalizing that with the feds right now. So just know that's all part of the fund. The federal indirect cost rate, again, this has been another issue that's popped up with the ESSER funds. I've talked about it a couple times, a couple presentations, but I want to make sure people are understanding. If you took indirect cost on any federal grant, you are then required to take indirect costs on all federal grants and all other grants. Essentially, the federal government doesn't kind of want you playing favorites with federal funds and taking indirect costs for those overhead costs on one pot of money. Essentially they're protecting these high-risk populations, which is where a lot of their funds come out to help and assist with those areas. So you either got to apply indirect costs to all your grants or none. Wasn't an issue in the past because we only had 1 or 2 districts that were using indirect costs, and they did it for all the grants, at least that we know of. We are building it into our GMS system to require you to do it for all grants. That'll be for next year, but it wasn't in place for this last year. So that's just an issue to be aware of. Also, again, with the new coding system, we've seen that the calculated indirect cost rates were excessive for ESUs and some schools. We've worked with the federal government to come up with a cap on that amount, which I think is in the next slide. But one of the issues we're seeing is that schools are coding technology for general operation of your district to the 2500s, which is a general kind of overview account where it's the central services and is part of the indirect cost overhead calculation. So if you're doing things like a one-to-one initiative and purchasing computers for students, that should not go in the 2500s. That should be in the instructional type of technology purchases so that it's not inflating your indirect cost rate. So just be aware of that. We already talked about the 395 and 396. That's the other issue that we're seeing that's affecting the indirect cost rate calculation as well.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes, absolutely.
The user's manual does give a good explanation for 395 and 396, so you can read a little bit more.
There's a good plug for the user's manual. One of the 3 documents that I promote on a regular basis: budget text, user's manual, and Kevin's TIOSA document.
I just want to interrupt you.
No, great. Got no problem. A nice thing that the ESSA team, Beth Wooster's team is doing is they are getting out the title applications sooner than they ever have. They're going to have it available before administrator days, and then they're going to have a workroom up in the Unis Center to give you a chance to work with them, ask questions, and get that that application completed, or at least well on the way while you're out there, and have them available. The closing date's still September 30th for that, but they're trying to make that a simpler process. It's been streamlined and updated and hopefully simpler for you. So again, just fiscal monitoring in general. This is not just the ESSER funds, but all federal funds. That program being done now requires, and I guess one of the things that are still seen is that when they come out, keep in mind that they are going to do monitoring for all of your federal grants, and they're going to check documentation on all those. So when you roll through your annual review, or not annual, I think everybody's reviewed every 3 years. It's done on a risk assessment. So some districts are done every year, some are done every other year, and some are done every 3 years. But they will be reviewing all of your federal information that's required to make sure that you're meeting federal requirements there. The common errors there, time and effort logs, that's one that we've been dinged on quite a few times from the auditor's office. Thanks, Jeff. I know it's not you. I know it's not you.
I
Yeah.
try to stay
But-
as far away from that as I can.
But that's something we need to make sure that all districts are keeping, time and effort logs when you're using federal funds and have multiple funding sources. That still continues to be an issue. We need to make sure that those are kept and available when we come out to do that monitoring. A policies and procedures manual is a requirement when you have federal funds. And then just making sure that you're not amending your AFR and changing federal accounts that you claimed reimbursement on. Basically, you claimed reimbursement and got federal reimbursement for title, IDEA, whatever the federal program is, and then you did an AFR amendment after the fact and moved those expenses out into a different thing, to a different account code. When they come out to the fiscal monitoring, that's going to create issues, and you're going to have a finding for that. So we've ran into that once or twice. Good, just a reminder, the Superintendent Transparency Act requires that you upload your superintendent's contract on or before August 1st each year. So even if there's no change to your superintendent's contract, we need that updated in CDC. It's in the portal in CDC collection there by August 1st. Every year there's about 40 districts I have to follow up with in August to get that done. So make sure that you upload it each and every year, even if there's no change. If it's just been, if your superintendent's contract has just been extended, update or upload the new contract in there. The census collection is opening. Is it open?
Today.
Opens today. That is due July 10th. We need to make sure that you're getting that submitted. That's going to be your district residents' children's that are aged 5 to 18 needs to be submitted in there. So if you have questions on that, you'll contact Michelle or Stephanie. Pupil transportation, just to highlight, make sure everybody's aware of. The IRS changed the reimbursement rate beginning July 1st. They upped it to 0.625 cents, so a pretty significant increase, obviously with gas prices being what they were, not really shocking. That means that if you are paying mileage to your parents, that rate for residents will jump up to $1.7813 per mile after July 1st. And for option students, it's 0.8906. That's out on our website, or should be out on our website with the new rates today. Also, just to keep you guys in the loop, we are working with the Safety Center to develop new, updated training to encompass the new entry-level driver training requirements the feds put in place on February 7th. We've been in contact with the states around us to see, Stephanie's done a lot of work on this for us to see what other states are doing, make sure what we're doing makes sense and lines up with that. We're also working with several districts, getting their input, the safety centers as well, We're in the process. It looks like what's likely going to happen is an online training course is going to be developed that's going to encompass all those new entry-level driver training requirements. That means that's going to be everything that drivers need to get their S endorsement, their P endorsement, their Class B or Class A CDL licenses, and their level training all together. So it's going to take an 11-hour class and make it into a 40-hour class, but it's encompassing all that other work that was being done by those drivers beforehand. We're going to make that, it looks like that's going to become an online class. Again, this hasn't been finalized, but it's the direction we're moving, and the feedback we're getting from districts is they're on board with that. If you have a transportation expert in your district that would like to discuss it a little bit more, feel free to reach out to Stephanie. She would be glad to get your input, talk through what we're doing with you. But 40-hour online class that can be done at each person's own pace. There'll be questions throughout to make sure that they're learning the information and paying attention. Then there'll be a 2-hour, basically in-person class with a certified trainer to do the testing portion and get that taken care of. Then we're looking at making the driving portion be available so that there can be somebody in your district that does that, is certified to give that driving test, or you could work with a third-party vendor to do that as well. So again, the effort, we know that finding bus drivers has also become a very big issue. We are trying everything we can to make sure that what we're doing is efficient and as easy as possible, while also safe and covering all the necessities to make sure that the students and the pupils across the state riding vehicles with schools and others are safe. So we're trying to cover all the bases, getting the feedback from you guys that are doing it on a regular basis. So online exempt school open for the new year. Just important for you public schools to know that you can track the private school or exempt school students in your district. That list will become available usually the first part of August. We are also developing a new system, and hopefully it's much more user-friendly to you guys as school districts, us, and the exempt school parents. But that will roll out for the 23-24 system, and is well underway in development right now. So just, I guess, aware of that. So opportunities for budget assistance, we know that's the big thing coming up. We will be in North Platte doing new soup orientation. So if you are a new superintendent, business manager, bookkeeper, and want to join in on that, or anyone's welcome to that. Also, it doesn't have to be new. A lot of times, first and second years come to those. You probably get more out of them in year 2 when you have a little bit more understanding. It's maybe not quite the fire hose of information that you get in that first year, but we'll be out in North Platte on July 19th, Tuesday, July 19th. That's at the Best Western out there. Send us an email, make sure you're registered with Mickey Iverson, or send any of us, and we'll make sure that she gets that information, gets you what you need and registered for that. All morning long, we will go over and present and cover everything you need to know about the finance side of things right away as you jump into your new role. In the afternoon, we have probably 5-6 years ago changed it up. We just work with you one-on-one. So we break for lunch somewhere around noon, 12:30, and we'll come back and we'll go over your budget with you. So it's an opportunity for budget assistance. If you're in the neighborhood and just want to talk that, go over that with us. We'll talk state aid. We'll talk anything, school finance, ESSER funds that you need help with, and just available. If you had questions in the morning and want to write them down and just talk individually with us, the 4 of us will be out there doing that. Again, North Platte and Milford on July 21st. Also, out at admin days, we will have a room, the Platinum. I don't know where that's at yet since it's in the new Eunice Center, but Platinum 3 and 4 for budget assistance, just like we did in the old Eunice Center. We'll be up there from 8 to 4 on Wednesday and Thursday. So stop in and see us. We'd love to help you. If there's anything we can do, even if it's not budget assistance, finance related, we are more than glad to help you in any way that we can. That's our job, and it's one of our favorite parts of our job. So, as always, you can email your budgets to us. We'll be glad to go through them. I do a lot of budgets that way. It seems to work pretty well for people. We can also set up Zoom meetings. We have most of the office up here is under construction at the moment, which is good because it means that it's on its way towards being set back up for us to have available, hopefully by this fall. But we do have a couple of conference rooms we can meet at, but still probably makes the most sense right now just to set up some Zooms or phone calls if you have budget questions. But if you're one of those people that just really loves to sit down, we can do that too, and are glad to help out any way we can. Just a reminder to follow along on Twitter. Try to keep you posted there for SFOS emails, any legislation that's school finance related. I try to do it with my own sense of humor to keep everybody smiling as well. So the contact information for the four of us is up there. Again, highly recommend if you're new that you bookmark our FOS webpage. That's where I'm going to tell you all the key financial information is available. And I think that wraps up our session this morning. If there are other questions and you didn't have a chance to ask them or we missed them in the chat code, just feel free to email those questions to any one of the four of us. I'd be glad to follow up. And okay, we are getting a couple questions. We'll stay on for a minute or two here before we stop the recording to see if there's any other questions that come in. But again, thank you guys for listening in. We'll make the recording available in a couple of days. So
Here's one, chat. On the budget worksheet, you got a great job, thank you. Let me get up there. On the budget worksheet, the property tax credit is always grayed out and not included in the budget receipts. Why? Should we expect to receive a similar amount of tax credit as the past year?
okay, so the reason that's grayed out is you can't count on that. That's not necessarily a requirement, and you don't need to include it with your budget. You need to just do your normal tax asking, and then that gets factored in to your normal tax asking. Essentially, what it does is, so for example, for round numbers, if your tax asking is $1 million, and your property tax credit amount calculates out to be, say, 150 million of that, what they'll do is they'll reduce your property tax request by that 150 million, and it'll end up being 850 million, with the property tax credit being sent to your district to make up the difference, showing up on each of those property tax payers' statements so that they see how much of the property tax credit saved them from paying out of their pocket. So you don't budget that amount. You need to just request your full property tax amount, not planning on that amount. That's all taken care of on the back end. Good question, though. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the record. Thank you, guys.